I met Dominic years ago, and he very much helped me. He gave me books, and he helped me learn what it means to be an Italian-American writer. I'm very grateful to be invited and to be able to participate through Zoom. I'm in Portland, Oregon, where I live. And I have about a 10-minute talk. I'd like to talk about my new book. It's called In Bruno's Shadow. It was published by Guernica. It just came out. Guernica is up in Canada. So let me start. I'd like to pull back the curtain and talk about my novel In Bruno's Shadow and the way it came to be as I wrote it. In 2003, I went to Rome over Christmas, partly to celebrate the holidays, but really to search for inspiration for a new book. I wanted my imagination to be stimulated. I wanted aspects of Rome to trigger a new creative impulse in me. Rome's art and architecture were my reward. When I saw Caravaggio's painting, The Calling of St. Matthew, I knew I was onto something. If you don't know the work, the painting has Christ and St. Peter come to tax accountant Matthew's counting house and point to him, calling him to follow them. Christ is barefoot, and he and Peter are dressed as they were dressed in their own time, in biblical times. Matthew and the others are dressed as they would be at the time that Caravaggio painted them, 1599. I was drawn to the interplay between the two time periods. This gave me the idea to write a story about North Americans in the 21st century who visit San Luigi dei Francesi, the church where the three early Caravaggios hang, and then for a narrative of the painting to duplicate itself or call to them in their 21st century lives. I saw that this was a way that I could use specific elements of Rome to inspire stories about contemporary characters. Most writers use setting as a background, as a kind of tone setter. I wanted to put setting in the forefront and use it as a generator. In another story, I used the optical illusion of the ceiling and dome in Sant'Ignazio, where you can see both a flat ceiling and a dome, and then if you move to the right spots on the floor, the paintings take on both height and depth. You see what seems to be an actual vaulted ceiling and dome. So I created a character who deliberately works to let others see her in two different ways. Another story. Bernini's Saint Teresa in Ecstasy offered me a real challenge. This piece shows a woman who seems overcome by the ecstasy of grace, but at the same time, her expression is often compared to a woman who's having an orgasm. The statuary is both sacred and sexually charged. And Bernini added a pair of boxes where 6 men are watching as if they're in a theater, as if what's happening before them is a performance. That adds voyeurism to the mix. That triggered another chapter. For a while, I thought I was writing a book of separate stories, connected only by the fact that they all take place in Rome. But when I returned to Rome the following year, 2004, again at Christmas time, I was in the Piazza Navona on the morning of the Southeast Asian earthquake and tsunami. The square felt different. In every church and public building, I saw flyers and appeals for tsunami relief. Even Pasquino, the stone statue that Romans for centuries have used to air their complaints and desires and hopes, had poems written about the tragedy taped onto it. In the Piazza Navona, the sun was shining, the air was cold. I walked around the Fountain of the Four Rivers, and after a while, I began to imagine a woman moving through the crowds with a collection box, silently asking money for tsunami relief. Rome had given me my book's ruling character. She's a kind of director, the generator of all of the other stories. She's foreign, I decided, Croatian. Her name is Dubravka. She grew up in Dubrovnik in the former Yugoslavia with her abusive alcoholic father. At an early age, she was betrayed by love. She works as a baker with her cousin in her uncle's kitchen in Dubrovnik's old city. Later, she moves and works in the Islamic section of Mostar in Bosnia and Herzegovina, She prays her Roman Catholic prayers every day in a nearby mosque after washing in the traditional Muslim manner. At the sacred site of Medjugorje, where the Virgin Mary was said to have appeared to a group of children and is still appearing, according to some, she witnesses a miracle. I won't give away what brings her to Rome, where she works in a pensione on the Campo di Fiori, and where she can look out her attic windows down at the statue of Giordano Bruno. As a refresher, Bruno is the brilliant philosopher, poet, and cosmologist who was imprisoned, tortured, and burned to death by the church for his beliefs. His hooded statue stands there in the square in Campo di Fiori, the field of flowers, defiantly facing the Vatican. Bruno's most glaring sin was that he believed our solar system was not creation's center, but only one solar system among many. And since we are creations of an infinite God, doesn't it follow that in God's infinite love, there might be other, perhaps an infinite number of others of God-made creatures, God-made creations living on other worlds? For this idea, he was killed. Like Bruno, Dubravka developed ideas of her own. She's a woman of true faith, not someone who merely follows doctrine. Both Bruno and Dubravka are fierce critics of the institution of the church and the rule of the papacy. And like Bruno, Dubravka is at odds with the Vatican. Now the book had a form of its own, as well as a second setting, Croatia and Bosnia, as well as Rome, and a pair of alternate timelines. John Paul II's death in early April 2005, a little over 3 months after the morning of the tsunami, gave the book its logical time frame and ending. All through the novel, characters whose lives echo the narratives portrayed in Roman churches and famous pieces of art raise this question, the question of how a loving, infinite, all-powerful God could allow a tragedy like the Southeast Asian tsunami to happen, a tragedy that took the lives of over 300,000 people. How does a loving God allow the suffering and death of children, of innocents? These issues are discussed, not answered. And since I wanted Caravaggio to be very present in the novel, I created a Roman performance artist named Agostino. He's a prankster and a provocateur. He decides to dress like Caravaggio did in his own time, the early 1600s, and he now goes around Rome recreating the legends we all know about Caravaggio's wild and colorful life. Agostino gets in pretend fights. He throws dishes of artichokes at waiters. So Caravaggio, Bernini, and Bernini's great rival Borromini run throughout the book. At the novel's ending, after the Pope has died, Agostino stands on the Piazza Navona in what he feels is his final performance. Let me read a couple of paragraphs from the book. Agostino turned his thoughts back to his reasons for being on the square today, to the imperative of channeling the true native spirit of the master Caravaggio. Agostino inhaled, exhaled, swung his magnificent double-edged Schiavona, presented himself to all those with eyes. He thought of his favorite painting, The Calling of St. Matthew, how he had used the youth seated closer to the viewer, the boy sitting on the bench, hand ready to strike down any intruder, as a model for his dress. That Christ and the Apostle Peter were clothed as they'd been in life was central to the work's genius. Agostino knew the anachronism was deliberate as well as telling. Caravaggio was suggesting that all of time can be simultaneous, collapsed into a single moment, and that there are single moments that can radically alter the direction of a person's life. With his sword, Agostino outlined an oval in the air. There is no past, no future, only now, this moment, Agostino thought. Only this moment, the one right here on the Piazza Navona, by the Fountain of the Four Rivers, where he stood, a man very much alive, happily in his prime, proudly Roman born, baptized Augustino, though at the same time he was also Michelangelo Merisi da Caravaggio. I'll stop here. The rest you'll have to read. Stand in Bruno's shadow. I hope you enjoy. Thanks. Dominic, you were very helpful to me because in some ways you anointed me as an Italian-American writer, so I began to take it seriously. And I had a friend who's African-American who's one of his teachers had said that it was his obligation to put something African-American in everything he wrote. And so what I tried to do in all of my books is bring in some aspect of Italianata. My father did not marry. My mother is not Italian, so, and we were very estranged from her family. So basically, my connection is with Nana and my father's two sisters, and with his side of the family. But unfortunately, I didn't learn Sicilian. I can say that I'm pleased and proud to have this. What I feel as a writer is that the world dealt me three cards. Number one, they dealt me Chicago, where I was born, lived in Chicago. Even after college, I moved back and lived on Taylor Street. They dealt me the fact that I was 17 years of, is it 17, 14 years? It seems like 17 years of Roman Catholic education. So I got Chicago, Catholicism, and being Italian. And with those three cards, I figured if I can't figure out writing, where to go with work. You know, I've been blessed. So all of my work, I think, has those elements. There's a little bit of Chicago. I have a Chicagoan in every book. And I believe my books are often about my own struggles with faith, with belief, as opposed to the kind of doctrine that we were taught. And I think that's reflected in Bruno's Shadow, the kind of battle between a true religious belief and then also a belief in an institution, the rules of the papacy. Let me also congratulate all of the writers who are there. I have many of your books. I'm going to get more of them. I've heard that this is all going to be taped and eventually put on YouTube, and I look forward to it. And I tip my hat, because I don't think it's easy to be an Italian-American writer. I don't know how seriously others take the literature, but I am so glad that it is alive and thriving, and I celebrate all of you. And I'll be thinking about all of you for the rest of today. Thank you very much again for the invitation. It was a pleasure to be here.